Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 2.5 of the Me Made Rainbow Making podcast. I'm Moll and I live in Wales in the UK with my partner, and we both do a variety of crafty things, some of which I talk about here. So I primarily talk about knitting, but I also sometimes talk about things like quilting and garment making, sewing I mean. And today I have got a mix of things. I've got 3 whole finished objects, one of which I've just realised is across the room from me. So I'm just going to go and grab that, but then we can get started. Okay, so let's start with what I'm wearing. I am wearing my recently finished souffle top. This is a pattern by Laura Penrose. As you can see, it's made in a nice bright yellow. This is the first time this has really shown up on camera, this colour. This is a really true version of this colour, but every time I've tried to show it before, like in pictures or whatever, it's gone really washed out. And in the body I'm holding this yellow with a green colour. You can see them just over my shoulder there. So this pattern starts with the yarn held single stranded. This is a alpaca yarn. The original pattern is written for things like mohair and I think slightly fluffier alpacas than I've used, but it is still quite fluffy and it's quite warm as well. It's a bit warmer than when I tried it on, when I started trying it on, I didn't think it would be as warm as it is now because it wasn't feeling quite as warm, but I think with the amount of fabric in the sleeves, it's quite warm. I'll just stand up a little bit so you can see the hem. So it's a double folded hem where you knit half of the hem essentially and then do a purl bump and then fold it over and knit it back down again. Knit it down. And the cuffs are finished in the same way. A little close to the top of the filming area. Yes, so I made size 7 and I did do, initially I thought I was going to do a lot more modifications than I actually ended up doing. So I just ended up doing one modification, which is that I moved some of the stitches when you mark where the edges of the sleeve are, I moved my stitch counts essentially. So what I did is I took 13 stitches from the back and put those stitches at the front. And the reason that I did that is because I have quite a large full chest measurement compared to my back width. And so I was concerned that if I just did the size 7 with no modifications at all, it was going to end up quite loose in the back and more tight in the front. So I was going to end up with, I was still going to have positive ease. I was going to have about 2.5 inches of positive ease. But I thought it would be loose up here and then tighter further down here. And I didn't really want that. I wanted more of the flowy fit that it has in pattern pictures. So that's why I decided to take some of the stitches from the back, which I didn't need so much because I have a narrower back, and I moved those onto the front so that the front would have more ease and the back would be it's not a close fit, it's still very much positive ease, but I just thought that way it was more balanced on my figure. And the reason that I picked 13 was just because so obviously when you follow a pattern, the numbers of stitches for each size are in the brackets after the instruction. So all I did was follow the back number. So you start at the centre back, your round starts at the centre back, and you work X number of stitches and place a marker for the beginning of the sleeve. And I just followed the number for the size 6 for the back, and then those were my numbers. I didn't do maths to fix it or anything, because I didn't think there was much point in figuring out some maths, particularly because I started from the size 7, and I'd already cast on. I'd already done quite a chunk of this knitting, which is single stranded, it was really difficult on my hands, so I didn't want to pull it all back, reconsider what size to make, and then go back through this process again. So I decided I would just go with it and not try and change the size too much, which is why I just did the numbers for the size smaller. I probably could have got away with doing more maths and figuring out more ways of adjusting this pattern to fit my particular proportions, but I'm very happy with the way that it's come out. I'm very happy with the amount of positive ease in front. I'm very happy with it. I'm so happy with how this sits over my arm, actually. This was one thing that I was really concerned about, because the pattern doesn't have a schematic. It says it should in the Ravelry attributes. It says it has a schematic, but it doesn't have a schematic. And so I was concerned really that because I have quite large upper arms, I was concerned that maybe the sleeve was going to be a little tight. Because Laura Penrose is a lot slimmer than I am, and hers doesn't look to have as much ease as mine does. So I wasn't entirely sure what kind of fit to expect from the sleeves, and I kind of wish there had been a schematic so that I could have seen written down, okay, it's this width for this size, this width for this size. And I think if I'd had that information, I would have been able to go, okay, what I want to do is start from the numbers for, I don't know, size 4, and then work extra stitches and extra increases in the front to get the ultimate circumference that I needed. But it worked out fine. I don't think that there were as many problems in not having that schematic as I expected. I kind of thought that because I didn't have that information, I wouldn't be able to see problems before they happened. But in the end, there weren't actually any problems with the fit. There was one slight problem with the instructions, which is that the instructions for the cuff are kind of confusing. So you have to knit the sleeve for 17 inches, and I'm quite a short person, and I thought 17 inches sounds like a lot of sleeve, like a lot of sleeve. So I read the instructions where it said, if you want to a different arm length, knit to the length of your arm minus a certain number of inches, as applied to either the short sleeve or the long sleeve cuff. And so I did that. And then I read a bit further down, and the length that she suggested in those instructions for how much you should leave for the cuff and the instructions for the cuff as written didn't add up. So so this cuff is 1 inch as worn, so it's 2 inches as made. So you have this inch and that inch. So she says to knit the long sleeve until the length that you want it minus 2 inches. But that's not the right measurement. It's minus 1 inch because you're adding 1 inch in the cuff. Yes, the cuff is 2 inches long before you fold it back and sew it down, but that's not how it's going to work as worn. And I did think perhaps it's meant to sit slightly back from the wrist, and that's why it's 2 inches. But that wasn't clear, and it wasn't written that way. It was written as if it was a maths mistake. And so I was kind of disappointed by that, because I thought that was, because it's in an explanatory bit, a bit about making a modification to fit your body. I think in a way there's a bit more of an expectation that is going to be correct, and if it looks like it might be incorrect, I think there's a bit more of an impetus to make sure that you're very clear. Like, yes, I say 2 inches because the sleeve is supposed to sit at bracelet length. So I felt like that could have been, either it's a mistake that needs to be corrected in that it's just a maths mistake, or it's not a mistake and it needs a bit more clarity. And that also impacted the short sleeve as well, as I recall. So there's 2 different lengths of short sleeve according to what size you make, and those 2 sizes have slightly different cuff lengths. But when she gives those instructions for adjusting the length of the cuff, adjusting the length of the sleeve, she only gives 1 cuff measurement for the short sleeve, even though she has 2 different cuff lengths for the shorter sleeve. And yes, it's a small difference. I think it was just 2 rows difference. So, I mean, what's that on my gauge? Like, just over a 1/4 inch. But it just looked a little bit like she'd added that in after the fact and hadn't quite double checked. But, I'm not saying that's what she did do. I'm just saying that's how it came across, and I wasn't super impressed with it. But that and the schematic aside, the pattern was really easy to follow. It was very clear. My only other issues with it are about the actual presentation of the PDF. So the PDF is great. I did find it a bit peculiar that the abbreviations are at the end of the pattern rather than at the beginning of the pattern. But that's personal choice. I'm not saying this pattern wasn't good because she did that, because that would be silly. The abbreviations are all there, they're all clear. And I did find her font choice a tiny bit difficult to read. So if you're maybe sensitive to that, I'm quite sensitive to that, because it's I get migraines quite easily, and sometimes font choice and font weight, they don't trigger a migraine, but I'm a little bit sensitive to like visual stimuli, so it can be a bit awkward for me sometimes. So if you're someone who's similarly visually sensitive, then you should know that going in. But it's not going to be a problem for the vast majority of people. And I don't think it's a thing that would occur to most people. It's just because I have this sensitivity that I noticed it. Yeah, but I don't think of either of those things, either the abbreviations or the font choice, as negatives to the pattern. They're just things where it wasn't quite what I expected, and so I was a little bit, oh, okay. Whereas the schematic and the instructions for modifying the sleeve length, I did think were important things that do slightly detract from the pattern. Again, only slightly, but it does detract, and it is something where I think it's important to have that. I think that this was a slightly earlier pattern from Laura Penrose, and I know that she's done several different versions of the souffle since, so she might have put a schematic in those. I don't know. I've got another pattern of hers, but it's not a garment pattern. That one does have a schematic, and it's a really good schematic. It's a really nicely done schematic, so she certainly has the skills to do them, and to do them well, and to do them very clearly. So I do think it was a shame that it wasn't in this one, but other than that, the pattern was really nice. It was very easy to follow. I think it had a nice level of instruction. It went into a nice amount of detail, but was still quite a short and concise pattern. I was honestly quite surprised how short the pattern was, because there's quite a lot of, you know, it looks like there's a lot of detail, and you know, there is detail. There's a I-cord edging around the neck, and there's a button loop. It has a keyhole in the back. This ruffle is a really lovely detail. The cuff finishing is very nice. So it's a very detailed pattern, but it's been expressed in a very clear but very concise way, and I really appreciated the way it was written. I think it was, if it hadn't been for the lack of the schematic, I would have just been like, okay, I'm only making Laura Penrose patterns now. But yeah, it was a lovely pattern. The only thing about my experience that I found more of a negative than I expected was the yarn choice, and that's completely on me. It's not a recommended yarn. It is the Navia alpaca, which is, I should have written this down. I made notes, but I didn't write this bit down. About 230 meters per 25 grams. So and it's quite light. I don't know if you're going to be able to see the strands. There we go. So it's quite fluffy and quite light, but it's not super fluffy. In this section and in the ruffle, but particularly in this section, it was really hard on my hands. When it was two-stranded, it was a lot easier to use and a lot easier to work with, but it was still kind of tough. And I've gone straight to cotton after this one, so my hands are not happy with me. So I would just hold that in mind if you are planning on making this and you are sensitive to yarns that don't have a lot of give in them. It was kind of difficult, but it was a lot easier when it was two-stranded. So kind of bear that in mind. You've only got the hand pain up until the end of the yoke. But it was a really nice experience. It did take a lot longer than I expected. It took 2 months, and I really raced to finish the ruffle. This was the last thing I did. I really raced to finish it because I did not want it to take more than 2 months. I really didn't. And I just got in under the line. It was 2 months minus 1 day. So it did take a long time, but it is one of the larger sizes and it is full sleeve. Now, you might have noticed as well that I did knit it quite cropped. I kind of wish I'd gone a little longer, just a little, like an inch maybe. But I'm also very happy with the length. So I think when I have my arms down and I'm wearing high-waisted bottoms, it's absolutely perfect. The length is exactly what I wanted, because it crosses that line. It crosses the waistband, but it's not really long, because being quite short and quite short-waisted, things that are too long get too long very quickly, and things that look strange on my proportions, there's not a lot between too short and too long. And I didn't want to be tucking this in because it's quite a thick fabric and it's quite fluffy and it's an open gauge. I wanted to reduce the chances of catching it on something or stretching the stitches out. So I did knit it. I can't remember exactly what measurement I knit it to. Certainly shorter than the sleeves. I think maybe 12 inches from the underarm. and I did block it quite aggressively. I did stretch it out quite a lot. I didn't pin it, but I did really pull it. Same with the sleeves. They're a little, when my arms are down, they're the perfect bracelet length, but when my arms are up, they sit a little short, which again, I don't mind because this keeps them out of the way. But I just think I could have maybe done with maybe an extra inch on the body and an extra half inch on the sleeves. But that might just be that I'm not used to shirts that I don't tuck in. So maybe I'm overthinking it. I don't know. Okay, so that's it for the souffle. I'm going to shut up about the souffle now. So my next finished object is the chanterelle shorts by So Liberated. And you got a peek of those earlier on. So I'm just going to stand up and show you. I can't get far enough away from the... Oh. You see what I mean? I can't get far enough away from the camera for you to see the whole length of the shorts, but you can see the pocket. It's the same on the other side. Elasticated waistband. It also has back pockets. It's roughly about mid-thigh length. So these are made from a fairly large scrap that I got from a de-stash of William Morris. I believe it's cotton canvas, but I'm not entirely certain. It was a fairly large piece, but it was a piece that, because I'm a fairly large person, it was a bit difficult for me to figure out exactly what I wanted to make with it. And I decided in the end that I was going to make these chanterelle shorts because I like So Liberated patterns. And I don't normally wear shorts, but I kind of felt that I needed one. And this was before the summer started here. And it turns out that I probably could have waited because it has not been a warm summer. I've not had a chance to wear these where, you know, like a long skirt or a light pair of trousers wasn't a better option. So I made them out of the scrap, and I got them out of the scraps quite easily. I would say that it's maybe it was 1.5 meters. I didn't measure the scrap, but I did get it out, and I could have got it out of less if I'd done the waistband on the opposite grain from what she suggested, because the waistband took up a lot of fabric, and it would have been quite easy to have done it on the cross grain and still got a nice result from it and used less fabric. So it was a bit of a difficult go to get it out of the scrap, but I've got quite a lot of scrap left. It's just because of how the curves were fitting together or not fitting together that meant that one of the, so I suppose two of the pieces, I think it was the back, I just had to nick into the seam allowance to get it out of the piece that I had. So I would say that the chanterelle shorts are a good pattern if you want to get something out of some really weird shaped scraps, because it should be fine. Yeah, so I made size 22 in these, and I did make 2 modifications. So the first modification was that I'll go by simplest. So the first one was that I didn't do as deep a hem as she suggested. I did half the depth of the hem. And the reason I did that was simply because when I tried them on, I was happy with the length unhemmed, and when I folded it up to be the proper hem, I just felt like it was a smidge too short for me. So it's too short for what I'm comfortable with. So I decided that I would just do half the width of the hem. And then the other modification was that because this is a heavier fabric than the pattern calls for, I think it doesn't have quite as much ease as it ought to have. And so when I tried it on, the legs were really tight before I put the waistband on. The legs were really, really tight. And when I sat down, I did kind of feel like I was trusting to the strength of that seam. So what I did instead was I unpicked the side seams and I took out as much as I could. So I'd already finished that seam with some bias binding. So I unpicked the outer seam. I didn't bother unpicking the bias binding. So I sewed the seam as close to the edge of the binding as I could physically get, just to get as much out of that seam as I possibly could without compromising the finish, without compromising the, because it was kind of a shreddy fabric, without compromising that that sealed finish. I didn't want to have any weak spots. And I ended up adding probably about a 1/4 inch on each piece of seam allowance. So probably a total of maybe a scant inch. And that has made it perfect. It fits really nicely. It doesn't feel tense when I sit down. But again, I don't think that's an issue of sizing. I think that's simply because A, I'm not used to particularly tight fitting shorts or trousers, and B, did I do the thing where I say one and then B? I might have done. The other thing is, because this is a heavier fabric than it was called for, I just think that added just enough extra width and extra tension that it just didn't have the give that it was maybe designed to have. So I do think it could be a sizing issue. I really don't think it is, though. I think either it's me and how comfortable I am with tight things, which is not very tight, trousers, which is not very, or it's because of the fabric, or it's both. But I don't think it's the pattern. The pattern itself was absolutely wonderful. It went together so easily. It went so quick. I finished them in days. And I'm not a person who easily finishes a sewing project, as you maybe know if you watched the first episode. I never explained why this is episode 2.5. Okay, so thank you for lasting this long by being interested in why it's episode 2.5. So the reason it's episode 2.5 is because I filmed the first podcast and then a month later I filmed a second one where I talked about these shorts, and I also talked about an acquisition that I've got that I'll talk about in a minute. And I recorded it and I was fairly happy with it. And then I was really struggling to find an editing software that was working. I used Canva for the first one, and I was wrestling with it the whole time because it kept saying, no, we can't upload this, it's too big, your file's too big. And so I kept trying with the second one. It really wasn't doing anything. It was like, no, we can't do this. And then I tried another one. I tried Clipchamp, and that was like, no, I'm going to freeze on you and then crash. And I just kept trying, and it just was really frustrating. And then when I finally managed to get it working, I realised that the noise from the washing machine that had been on while I was recording, you could hear it so loud. And so I was just like, okay, well, I'm not going to post that because it annoys me when people post things with really loud background noise that they don't normally have. I know it's not generally people's fault, but I'm like, I would feel like a hypocrite doing that when I don't like it. And so I just thought, okay, fine, I'll record another one. And I ended up not recording for ages. And then I just thought, well, I'll just skip it then. I'll just do one when I should have done the third one. And so I'm thinking of this one in my mind. It's not a proper third one because there was no second one, but it's also not the second one because the second one didn't work, didn't go. So that's why I'm calling it 2.5. We'll go to 4 next time. So No, we'll go to 3 next time. Okay, so where was I? The shorts. I really enjoyed the pattern, and it went together really quickly, and it was very simple and very straightforward. And it really built my confidence back up sewing. Like, I've made a few things recently that are self-drafted or hacked, and I'm fairly good at self-drafting and hacking, but I get easily overwhelmed with it. So I'd had a few things in a row where I was just like really frustrated because it wasn't working out exactly how I wanted it to, and just not enjoying it and taking forever and feeling really upset. Whereas with this one, I just started and I just listened to what she said and I did exactly what she said, and it turned out completely fine. So then when I had to make the 2 modifications that I had to make, I felt confident to make them because I had just managed everything else really easily. Oh, one more thing, it is supposed to be sewn down. There is supposed to be either 1 or 2 lines of stitching over the waistband. I decided to skip those mainly because my sewing machine is a hand crank machine, and so you can't stretch the elastic and sew on the machine. And I liked how it was sitting, and I liked how the creases, because of the elastic, I liked how everything was sitting, so I decided I'm just going to wear them a few times and see how they go, and if I decide no, I need this sewn down this way, I'll do it on my partner's machine where I have both hands free, but I won't bother with it yet. So that's that one, and I'm just going to take a bit of tea before I show you my third one. Okay, so the third one is that I finished my Cape Russet quilt. You're not going to see a lot of this if I stand up, so I'll see if I can put a picture of it in instead. But this is the quilt. This is actually the long edge, so it's this way up, but it doesn't matter. You saw more of it that way. So I finally finished this. It was a quilt kit from Cotton Patch, and it was I can't remember the specific range for the Cape Russet ones, but those some of those details are in the first podcast, including what the back fabric is, which I think is called Jewel Tone Hummingbird by Makawa. So it was a really simple quilt. I'm used to paper piecing and I'm not used to patchwork, and I'm a bit scared by patchwork, but this went together mostly very easily. I made 1 or 2 small mistakes about fabric orientation, but other than that, went together fine. I machine quilted it. I don't know, maybe you can see. Yeah, you can kind of a bit see it. Using a couple of variegated Gutterman threads. And so I started quilting it, and then my machine needed a service. And then I was just feeling frustrated and I didn't do anything. And then I talked about it on the first podcast. And after that, I just zoomed through it. I was like, okay, I'm just going to get this done. I'm just going to finish it. And then I finished quilting it, trimmed it, and then it was time to make the binding. And I couldn't find my instructions, so I cut the binding according to a tutorial. And I ended up cutting the binding really, really thin. It was 1.5 inches, I think. And so putting it actually on the quilt was horrendous. I mean, not sewing it down the first time, but flipping it over and sewing it down the second time was just a nightmare. So you can see that like it's kind of uneven on the back. That was the side that I machine sewed. It's a little bit uneven on the front, but it's not quite as uneven. But I'm really happy with it. I feel like I don't feel like I did a good job, because there's a lot of issues with it. Like some of the squares are warped because my machine sewed it, my machine quilted it, and my machine doesn't enjoy quilting, so it's sort of pushed and manipulated it and warped a couple of the squares. But it's my first patchwork quilt, and I feel kind of like I've got over like a threshold now. Like I've done one. I've made a couple of quilts before, but paper pieced. You know, I've made a patchwork quilt. I've done the cutting. I've used the rotary trimmer. I've used the OmniGrid. I've pieced on the machine, and now my machine needs another service. You know, I've done all of the things that were these big kind of hurdles to me because I was feeling like, well, I'm not going to get it right. I'm going to be so frustrated. I'm going to be so upset. And I didn't do it perfectly, but I'm not as frustrated or upset as I thought. And I'm actually quite pleased with it because it is just, I just think it's so beautiful. Like the colours are so vibrant and full. And I just think it's so lovely. And so it's probably going to go on our couch actually, which currently there's one that I made, which is in these, I can't remember what what is it? I can't remember what the range is, but it's a something veil, I think. It's a Lancashire themed. Is it Yorkshire? Anyway, it's a Lewis and Irene range, and it's these like Lucy Bottom blocks. Really nice, really like it. But it's all in these tones of like brown, grey and green and blue and yellow. And then there's a quilt that my spouse made, which is called the potato quilt. They had all of these scraps of like they had some fabric that was chips, fries, and then they had some fabric that was like actual potatoes. And so they've just made this quilt of just these squares of potato fabric with then like yellow and cream, and then a brown border and some of this chip fabric, and it's really cute. It's one of my absolute favorite things. It's so camp. So there's these two quilts on the couch, kind of layered up, and I'm kind of wanting to just throw this on top of it just to make the most colourful chaos in the world. But I think it would be a bit too extreme to have, because really the two quilts go nicely together because they're both quite yellow, and it looks a bit silly, but it also looks on purpose. And I think this one would just be too much. So this is probably going to go, I don't know. It's definitely going to be like a couch, quick nap, wrap around you watching TV kind of quilt. But I'm definitely not going to make another one this size in future, because obviously there's the one I just talked about with the Lewis and Irene fabric, and then I made one with a different Lewis and Irene and also some in the beginning fabrics that's space themed, and that was a really small one, and the cat has that to lay on. And then she also has about 3 more quilts to lay on. And then there's the 2 on the couch, and then there's this one. So I think we're kind of filled up with small lap quilts now. So I'm going to mainly, I think, focus on bed-sized or usable on the bed kinds of quilts. Maybe not full bed size, but like summer quilts and things like that. Just going to throw this out. So my next quilt, the next quilt that I want to make is going to be the Elizabeth Hartman Bigfoot. It's called Legendary. But I don't know when I'm going to get that started because my machine, like I say, my machine needs a service, so I need to get in touch with the lady who does that. And then maybe I'll get started on the Bigfoot quilt. And then there's a couple of other ideas that I've got. I bought 2 days ago some 1970s fabric scraps, not yardage. one fat quarter of one and like some small scraps of some others. And I'm thinking maybe that I'm going to do some kind of scrap quilt. I'm going to like gradually gather these fabrics together and maybe do a scrap quilt, but it might end up being like some patchwork shorts, like the Matchy Matchy Sewing Club chore shorts, for example, with like made of squares of patchwork, something like that. I don't know. But the Bigfoot quilt is definitely going to happen, and I'm going to add blocks to it to make it fully bed size. But that probably won't happen until I get my machine serviced, and God knows when I'm going to get around to that. Anyway, so works in progress. I only have one work in progress, and there's a bit of a saga attached to it, which is that if you watch the previous podcast, you will know that I started a 4-ply tolsta by Rebecca Clow, and I had just got past the short rows and I was knitting it in a pink cotton yarn, which is also just here. It looks really neon on camera. I don't know what's making it look so neon. It's not. It is kind of like a Barbie pink, but it's not as vibrant as that. It's not as neon. It's slightly softer. So I was knitting that, and then she came out with the bust shaping for the tolsta, and so I went, okay. Well, she said that she was going to come out with it. So I said, okay, I'll wait for that. So I wait, and that's why I cast this on. So I waited for that to come out, and by that point I was through this one. So I thought, well, I'll finish this one, and then I'll go back to the tolsta. And then I downloaded the bust shaping, and I looked at it, and the way that she's done it is that she's written a completely new pattern for the D cup and F cup shaping. And so I couldn't be bothered to really compare and make sure that I was okay with the tolsta as I was knitting it. That I'd started the one that I started. I wasn't sure that I had the right numbers. And then I looked at it a bit more and I thought, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cast on a smaller size, but adjust the shaping to get to a larger circumference. So I'd started, I think, in size 5, and when I did the maths, I figured out that I should maybe start with a size 4. Maybe I'd even cast on a size 6, I can't remember. Anyway, so I thought to myself, okay, I'm only past the short rows, so I'm not very far in. So I pulled back the pink one, and I intended to cast on again in that same pink yarn once I was finished with the souffle. And then I got distracted by the Let's Picnic Tea by Sunmade Knits, and I decided that I was going to knit that first in some yarn that I had, and have that and do that first before the tolsta. So I did a swatch for that after I finished this, the same day that I finished this, and I hated it. And the reason that I hated it was nothing to do with the pattern whatsoever. It was because I'd been kind of stupid and decided I was going to knit it in cotton yarn and not the merino that it called for. But at that gauge, with that specific, it's a slip stitch colour pattern. With that slip stitch pattern at that gauge, the cotton yarn just wasn't the right density at all. And maybe if it had been merino, it might have bloomed and not looked as gappy, but it just didn't look good. So I decided to pivot for the 3rd time and knit a tolsta in the yarn that I had decided to make the Let's Picnic in, and that is yeah, we go. That is this. These are my colours. This one's not showing up very well. Trying to see if I can find something to show the colour up more. Ah. I'll have to cut that bit out. No, it's not showing. It's It's again, it's showing this pink as very neon. It's not. It's a fairly orangey pink, but it's not neon. Anyway, so that's Drops Muscat. It's DK weight, about 100 meters per 50 grams. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll cast on a tolsta and I'll do a DK version. So I cast on for the DK version. Well, no, I started with a gauge swatch, and I looked at it and I thought, something odd. I'm not sure what's going on. I was measuring my gauge and I just was like, something's a bit strange here. And so I ended up getting I cast on with the recommended size of needle, and I almost always get, I think because of the way that I knit, I almost always get gauge. So I looked and I was like, why am I not getting gauge? Why am I so far off gauge? And so I thought, okay, well, I'll go down a number of sizes. So I went significantly down in needle size, cast on, knit the ribbing, knit the short rows, looked at it again, and went, this isn't coming out the length it's supposed to be coming out. You know, this doesn't quite, there's something wrong here as well. It doesn't seem right. So I measured my gauge again, and it seems like what I'd actually done was, when I was using the recommended size, I wasn't loose enough, and I had thought I was too loose. I'd got the direction wrong, so I'd gone down when I maybe should have gone up. And so what I'd actually ended up knitting was the 4-ply gauge with a DK yarn. And luckily, I loved it. I really loved it. I tried on the collar when it was just the collar and the short rows, and it fit exactly like I wanted. It fit much more like the Let's Picnic, which that's the reason that I'd decided to go with that one rather than the Tolsta, because the Let's Picnic had more of a retro vibe that I was really into and fit quite closely. And whereas the Tolsta has quite an open, it has a similar level of openness to this. And I didn't mind that, but it's not exactly what I wanted. But when I tried on the Tolsta that I'd started, it was like, oh, this is fitting exactly how I wanted it to, despite being completely the wrong thing. So what I ended up doing was when I noticed, what I did was I just increased to the correct number of stitches that I was supposed to have for size 4, which is what I cast on. So my cast on edge is the correct number for size 4 for the DK, then there's the ribbing, then there's the short rows, then there's one row of raglan increases. Sorry, my cat's going around underneath my tripod. And then I did some increases just to get up to the number for the 4-ply. Get up to the numbers for the 4-ply. So that's weird section 1. Weird section 2 is that what I actually decided to do size-wise was, I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's really long-winded, but what I essentially decided to do, because there's the bust shaping, and it only goes up to if you have a 6-inch difference between your upper bust measurement, which is here, and your full bust measurement, which is, I mean, it changes on different people, but it's approximately here. I have a 10-inch difference, which is obviously significantly more than 6. And so I could probably have followed the F-cup instructions, but I was concerned that I was going to end up with either too much negative ease in the front or too much positive ease up around the yoke, depending on what size I'd gone with. So what I decided to do was I decided to cast on for size 4, work size 4 for the back and the sleeves, but then when the size 4 and 5 start differing in more than stitch count, so you increase the raglan at a different rate depending on different sizes. So for this front part, it's the same increase rate regardless of size, you just have different stitch counts. and a bit further down it starts being a slightly different rate. So I followed the rate for size 5 for the front, and essentially I'm following the rate for the size 4 on the sleeves and back. Because they're sort of adjacent sizes, it's not that big of a difference, but it is going to, I'm aiming for approximately 0 ease, and I think I'm on track for that. The only other adjustment I made after that was to add 2 stitches to the back. So I haven't added those stitches, it's just doing 1 extra raglan row in the back to add 2 stitches, or what works out to about ½ inch at my gauge, just to make sure that I'm as close to 0 ease as I can get. So it's just because the circumference is your back width plus your front width, and if I'm changing the back width and increasing the front width, I'm still not getting this exact same circumference as the back width of size 5 plus the front width of size 5. And that's obviously that's on purpose, that's what I want, but that differential between the back width of size 4 and the front width of size 5, the full circumference that made was just slightly smaller than I wanted, so I just added 2 stitches to the back. Or will be adding 2 stitches to the back. So it is, let me show you, I need to put my stitch, my needle minders on, just because it's on a cable that's a bit too short, well, a lot too short to really properly show you, but my barber cord is also quite a bit too short to show you right now, so I just left it on the cables. So this'll do. So that's there. Yeah, you can see that quite well, can't you, really? So I did essentially a highlighter cast on. This is German twisted cast on, and I did 2x2 rib rather than 1x1 rib, which is just my preference. I just think 2x2 I just enjoy more. And then I'm working these stripes, so it's 5 3 5 3. Oh, there's one. I don't know if you can just about see this. 5 1 3 5 3 1 5 5 5, and then it repeats. Yeah, and I'm really happy with it. I'm almost at the point of splitting for the sleeves. You can kind of see I'm basically where this ruffle is. So I've only got, I think, maybe 4 more rows of one kind of raglan, and then it changes, and I just have to do that for another couple of rows. So I think I'm maybe 6 rows off from splitting for sleeves. So I'm hoping to do that maybe this afternoon, but I don't know, because it might take a little bit longer than I'm hoping. They do tend to. I'm like, oh yeah, well, it won't take me that long, and then I just don't knit fast enough and it takes me ages. But I'm really happy with it. I'm a little bit concerned I might run out of yarn, because I've gone through the yarn faster than I expected. I should have enough based on the yardage requirements for the fingering weight, but the 4-ply weight. But I'm just not sure. I just seem to be going through it faster than I expected. But as I mentioned, quite short-waisted, so maybe it will work out in the end, because I am aiming for quite a cropped fit, similar to this one, but like I said, maybe a tiny bit longer. So we'll see. I'm more precious about the sleeve length than I am the body length. I'm more willing to have a little bit of stomach showing than I am to have my sleeves shorter than I want. So what I might do is split for sleeves, do maybe an inch or 2, and then do the sleeves. because obviously, I mean, it'll change the fit of the body as well, so I might as well. And then see how far I can get on the body. But I will be doing this little yellow edging at the bottom of the rubbing on the sleeves and body as well, so that might help. So just put that. Oh, sorry. Yes. So those are all. Those are all my finished objects and my only whip. So yes, acquisitions. Okay. So I promised this one in the first episode. I teased this one. And I said at the time that it was going to be the most, even if all that you knew of me, you've not followed me on Instagram or anything, all you knew about me, I should say I'm Me Made Rainbow on Instagram as well. If all that you knew of me was the one podcast that I just made, you would still be able to guess what the colours of this yarn were. And as you can see, it is pink and yellow and orange. You can see the orange better on this one. And also the pink, the lightness of the pink. So I got these from the, what was it called? Is it the library collection? The Sewrella yarns, I think it was the library collection. And this is art history. It's called art history. I got 2 skeins. They arrived days after I finished filming the first podcast. And so I was very excited to film the second one. But then the second one went completely weird. So I'm just bursting with excitement about this now, because this is the time you'll actually get to see it. And it is on their classic sport base, which is 100% superwash merino wool, and it is 328 yards per 100 grams. It doesn't give a meterage. And yes, I got 2 skeins, so around 660 yards. And what I'm going to make with it is, what I think I'm going to make with it, I should say, is a pressed flowers cardigan by Amy Christophers. And I hadn't decided that at the time. When I bought the yarn, I told myself I was allowed to buy it because it's quite expensive, and it's shipped from America as well, so the shipping was expensive. So because it was an expensive yarn, I said to myself, okay, well, decide what you want to make with it before you buy it, so that you know, you don't just buy one skein and then you're stuck. You buy the amount that you need. And what I was going to do was I was going to do 2 different colourwork blouses. And I decided they were really nice. One was by the Petite Knitter and the other was by Teddy Lutzek. So I got one for one and one for the other. And then I just kept looking at them and I just thought, I don't think that the variegation is going to work with that pattern as well as a solid would with either of the patterns. So I had a bit more of a think, and then I came across the pressed flowers cardigan, which is designed with a variegated yarn in mind. And I partly decided that based on Stacey Elston's Stress Knits pressed flowers, which has a similar-ish colloy to this yarn. And so I decided to do that, but what ended up happening was that takes more of the yarn than I'd bought, because it has the colourwork on the sleeves as well. It has the colourwork on the body and the sleeves. And one of the patterns I'd initially decided to use was just yoke colourwork, and the other one was sleeve colourwork. So this is full body colourwork and arms as well. But I had a look at the numbers, and what I've decided to do instead is just to do the colourwork on the body and then do plain sleeves. There were a couple of projects that do it that way, and I really like those. And I had a look at the numbers for the pressed flowers vest, and I think I will have enough yardage to do that. So that is my plan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pair it with a brown, like a nice warm chocolatey-ish brown, and that's going to be my main colour, and then the art history is going to be the contrast colour, but I haven't found that yarn yet. And I'm not too fussed because I've got a lot to keep me going, so I don't need it right away. I just want to have a really clear idea in my head because this yarn is kind of special and it's the colours that I really enjoy. I mean, look at this. Like, it's exactly the same, right? Like it's exactly the same. Okay, so I just have 2 more acquisitions to show you. Sorry, my partner came downstairs, so I'm a little rushed now. Okay, so the first one is this little tiny Turkish spindle from Cat and Sparrow. I think it's the mini Turkish spindle. Can't remember the colourway, but it's this lovely chartreuse colour, and it's 3D printed, and it comes disassembled obviously, and you fit it together yourself. It's really nice actually. I've never had anything 3D printed, and it feels really solid, and it rattles very slightly, but that's the way they go together, so it's not gonna not, but it's tiny. It's much smaller than I thought, and I did try to learn to spin on a drop spindle, but I really didn't get along with it because I think that the way that it was weighted, I'm not saying it was badly weighted, I just didn't really get how to make it be steady. And I know that it's I know now that it's practice, but at the time I just thought I was being stupid. And it was like the sewing, it was just ended up related in my head to all of this like frustration. And so I gave it to a friend who spins. And then a few people that I watch on Instagram have started spinning on a wheel, and I can't afford a wheel, but I just thought, well, I'll try again, I'll see how I go. So I got the spindle, and then I also got some merino tops, and this is from Ginger Twist Studio. It's 100 grams. It was under £5. It seemed so cheap to me, and it's such a lot. Like when I saw 100 grams, I thought, well, it seems like a good deal. It would be an amazing deal if it was yarn, so it probably is a good deal. And then kept thinking, well, I bet it's not actually going to be as much as I'm thinking, but it's so much. It's all of this. It's so much. And I've not started, but I think I will soon, when I can actually sit down and have the brain space to learn how to do it. But it's such a nice colour. Isn't it a lovely colour? It's hand dyed, I think. It's just so nice. It feels so nice. It's just so nice. So I'm kind of excited. I'm excited to start. I'm a little apprehensive because last time went so weirdly and badly, but I think it will be fine. I'm not exactly going to start spinning entire skeins because I've only got a tiny spindle, but it might be nice to. It might be nice to start spinning like my own contrast yarn for colour work and stuff. I don't know, but I'm hoping it will go nicely, and it's a lovely colour that I think I will really enjoy working with. That was important to me because I thought if I just get a plain, I'm not going to feel as drawn to it, whereas if I get a colour that I just enjoy in and of itself, then maybe it will be easier for me to think, oh yeah, I want to engage with this. So that's my logic, and I've not started yet, so I don't know if my logic holds true, but I hope it will. But yes, yes, I think that's it. That's everything. So I am going to go and have another cup of tea, and I'm going to eat lunch, and then I'm going to see if I can split the sleeves on my tolsta. I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you for watching. I hope you spend as much time as you want to spend knitting and that it goes well. And if you start sewing, I hope that goes well and you don't suddenly need your machine serviced in the middle of what you're doing. But have a wonderful time, and I will see you probably in a month. Okay, bye.